Modernism.
What created modernism? Thomas Edison created the first light bulb that lasted over 1,500 hours in 1879. Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler were the two most credited men for the invention of the automobile. Benz made the inside and Daimler created the outside of the vehicle. The Wright brothers made their first flight at Kitty Hawk on December 17, 1903. Einstein, Freud, and Jung were the three most important people during the time of modernism. Albert Einstein proposed the theory of relativity. This stated that there is no such thing as an absolute position, speed, or momentum in the universe. Sigmund Freud was a well-known psychologist during this time period who came up with the perfect idea of how a person should be viewed in society. This perspective became known as the Freudian model of man. Carl Jung suggested that there is a greater connection than what we consciously understand. He came up with the idea of archetypes, which is the basis of replication. World War I began in 1914. It was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire against the Allied forces of Great Britain, the United States, France, Russia, Italy, and Japan. World War I ended in 1918. World War II officially began on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. It did not end until 1945.
What defined modernists? The new hard machinery discovered during these times makes modernists feel cold and alone within an evolving, complicated society. Due to the World War I and II events, America has experienced numerous deaths and is written through irony, satire, and comparisons in their poetry. From technological advances erupting, modernists did not want to be harnessed to just one system, in fear of their creativity being taken away again. Straying from European culture and traditions, nihilism allowed modernists the opportunity to decide their own religious and moral principles. Breaking away from their roots gave them the opportunity to create their own guidelines for the world to successfully renovate through technology, wars, and art. And they believed imagination is the key to freedom.
Modernist art.
Van Gogh, country road in a province night. I still have a cypress with a star from down there, a last attempt. A night sky with a moon without radiance, the slender crescent barely emerging from the opaque shadow cast by the earth. One star with an exaggerated brilliance, if you like, a soft brilliance of pink and green in the ultramarine sky. Across was some clouds a-hurrying. Below, a road bordered with tall yellow canes. Behind these the blue bases Alps. An old inn with yellow-lighted windows, and a very tall cypress, very straight, very somber. On the road, a yellow cart with a white horse in a harness. The two late wayfarers, very romantic, if you like, but also Provence, I think. This painting resembles the vivid imagery used in part of a letter written by Vincent van Gogh to Paul Gauguin. The Scream by Edvard Munch. Essentially, this famous picture is autobiographical, an expressionistic construction based on Munch's actual experience of a scream piercing through nature while on a walk, after his two companions, seen in the background, had left him. Fitting the fact that the sound must have been heard at a time when his mind was in an abnormal state. Munch makes it in a style which, if pushed to extremes, can destroy human integrity. The scream can be interpreted as expressing the agony of the destruction of human personality by its unifying force. The 1895 pastel-on-board version of the painting was sold for a record of US $120 million at an auction on May 2, 2012. The previous record for the most expensive work of art sold at an auction had been held by Pablo Picasso's Nude Green Leaves and Bust, which went for a US $106.5 million at Christie's 2 years prior.
Pablo Picasso's figures Dan und Fattel. Cubism was truly revolutionary style of modern art developed by Pablo Picasso and George Braques. It was the first style of abstract art which evolved at the beginning of the 20th century in response to a world that was changing with extraordinary speed. Cubism was an attempt by artists to refresh the tired traditions of Western art, which they believed had run their course. The Cubists challenged conventional forms of representation, such as perspective, which had been the rule since the Renaissance. Their aim was to develop a new way of seeing which reflected the modern age.
Edward Estlin Cummings, or E. E. Cummings as he is better known, was born on October 14, 1894, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cummings was born into a Unitarian family whose nourishing and early encouragement of his poetic and artistic endeavors provided the formative foundation he would build upon his entire life. Cummings was educated at Harvard University, where he was a member of a prestigious graduating class alongside such writers as John Dos Passos and T.S. Eliot. Cummings' visionary influence upon the history of poetry took shape in the form of three distinct poetic styles. The first of these is his Apollonian style, a mythic, lyrical style heavily influenced by his studying of the Romantic poet John Keats. Cummings' creative output in this style is concerned with the cycles of the natural world or the essential rhythms of human life. Subjects such as sunrise, sunset, snowfall, springtime and plant life, the flow of rivers, moon cycles, and the eternal presence of the firmament and stars are notable. Cummings makes use of archetypes in dealing with these subjects. He utilizes the imagistic concepts of the garden, the poet, the mistress, the vagabond, and the clown. The Apollonian mode is economical, flowing, and utilizes fresh, novel images, colloquial phrasing and syntax, and is virtually always presented on the page with a flowing, visual guidance for reading that allows for the creation of a delicate impression or a modest assertion. The second and third styles were a satiric style, and what Cummings himself christened his modern style. The spelling of satiric is based on the mythological figure of the satyr because he occasionally used this form as an expression of libidinous energy, as well as for the satirical criticism of folly or vice. The satiric style is also characterized by its rejection-filled attitude towards society and life, its utilization of connotatively ugly diction, and the later development of wit and high spirits indulging in a gentle mockery of human follies. When the gentleness of this form is set aside, a sincere and ruthless criticism denounces evil or viciousness. It reflects a dark view of human behavior and a hostile attitude towards society. Its materials are pompous, ineffectual, hypocritical, squalid, corrupt, or deceitful people. The modernist style consisted of myriad alterations in bending, breaking, twisting, mending, and reshaping all the conventional aspects of form, and built off of the other two styles. It is heavily influenced by Cummings' reading of Ezra Pound and Gertrude Stein. During his lifetime, his genius was recognized by other prestigious writers such as James Joyce and F. Scott Fitzgerald, and his influence continues to resonate through the literary world today. T.S. Eliot was born on September 26, 1888, in St. Louis, Missouri. After his education at Harvard was behind him, Eliot spent a year in Paris, and then moved to London, where he came under the influence of his contemporary Ezra Pound. Pound recognized Eliot's poetic genius immediately after they met, and subsequently assisted in the publication of much of his work in a number of magazines, most notably The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which earned him the respect and attention of many of his contemporaries. 5 years after the publication of Eliot's first book of verse, Prufrock and Other Observations, his most known work, The Wasteland, was published, and his reputation soared to unprecedented heights. Eliot's literary influences were myriad, and his literary pantheon consisted of the English metaphysical poets of the 17th century, most notably John Donne, and the 19th century French symbolist poets. Eliot was also known for his conservative political and social worldviews, as well as his work in literary criticism. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948, and continues to influence writers today.
Modernism poems.
Who knows if the moon's a balloon coming out of the keen city in the sky, filled with pretty people? And if you and I should get into it, if they should take me and take you into their balloon, why then we'd go up higher with all the pretty people. Then houses and steeples and clouds go sailing, away and away, sailing into a keen city which nobody's ever visited, where always it's spring and everyone's in love and flowers pick themselves.
When Eliot refers to the moon, he is alluding to heaven and how it's a wishful thought of eternal existence after completing his duties of life. The pretty people that heaven is filled with means that Eliot hopes to go to heaven where people look like they did in their 20s or the best times of their life. This helps glorify his idea of heaven. Cummings' main idea of this poem is that he wanted to get away from the death-filled world that he lived in, almost like heaven, where no one knows what it really is, but everyone wishes to be there.
Death by water.
A current under sea picked his bones in whispers as he rose and fell. He passed the stages of his age and youth, entering the whirlpool.
When referring to the current picking his bones, Eliot is metaphorically stating that this man is drowning gradually. When he rose and fell, his struggle to breathe is obvious, and the following line plays off of the fragile breaths, since he is reliving all of his life within those moments. The man is entering the whirlpool, which is his last stages of life, and is entering death. Eliot's main purpose of this poem was that regardless who someone was, death happened to a variety of people, and that nobody could escape death.
Pearls of Wisdom and Immorality by Ezra Pound. Sing we for love and idleness, naught else is worth the having. Though I have been in many a land, there is naught else in living. And I would rather have my sweet, though rose leaves die of grieving, than do high deeds in Hungary to pass all men's believing.
When referring to Ezra choosing to have his sweet compared to the rose leaves grieving, he would rather not risk his life in the war, which would leave his family grieving if he died. By having his life controlled by his decisions, his life is sweet, where anything could happen. Ezra Pound would rather accompany his love instead of fighting in World War I. Although he respects the soldiers defending their country, he believes in peace and love over violence.
Apology by William Carlos Williams. The beauty of the terrible faces of our non-entities stirs me to it. Colored women, day workers, old and experienced, returning home at dusk in cast-off clothing, faces like old Florentine oak.
When listing the types of people as non-entities, Williams is showing how the colored women, day workers, and older people are coming home at late hours of the night, only to get up again early the next morning to continue their obligations. Williams was describing how hardworking people of the Modernism era go unrecognized, yet they are the building blocks to a successful world.
Aunt Helen by T.S. Eliot. Miss Helen Slingsby was my maiden aunt, and lived in a small house near a fashionable square, cared for by servants to the number of 4. Now, when she died, there was silence in heaven, and silence at her end of the street. The shutters were drawn, and the undertaker wiped his feet. He was aware that this sort of thing had occurred before. The dogs were handsomely provided for, but shortly afterwards the parrot died too. The Dresden clock continued ticking on the mantelpiece, and the footman sat upon the dining table, holding the second housemaid on his knees, who had always been so careful while her mistress lived.
In his poem Aunt Helen, T.S. Eliot mocks the result of ineffectually habitual lives, the sometimes lofty attitudes of the affluent, and the manifestations yielded by oppressive repression. Consistent with the work of many of the modernist poets, this piece has no clarion form or pattern. In the poem's first 3 lines, Eliot introduces the subject of the poem as Miss Helen Slingsby, his maiden aunt, who is cared for by servants to the number of 4. These lines set the thematic tone for the piece. His reference to his aunt as Miss infer that he held a distant relationship with her, and his inclusion of the word maiden to identify her build up to the piece's further elucidations. In lines 4 and 5, Eliot writes of there being silence in heaven and at the end of her street at her death to illustrate that no one was moved enough by her presence, thoughts, or actions on earth to mourn for her loss. Lines 6 through 10 paint a picture of the resultant circumstances and reinforce themes introduced in lines 4 and 5, and lines 11 through 13 depict the final rebellion of the servants, manifested in their consummation on the table at the poem's completion.